On this prequel episode, we've got our GoodFellas fan poll follow-up. We're learning about Cinderella and previewing Ever After. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. It's another prequel episode, which we do every other week. I say that every time like it's a surprise. Like it's another prequel episode. Who saw that coming? They happen every 2 weeks. But we did finally, after over a week of voting and very, very competitive bracket, Katniss.
That's Katniss. I'll put her in the bedroom.
Katniss yelling at the door. And after some intense competition, we have a winner, which we will discuss in just a little bit. I mean, I already said it in the title. And if you follow us on social media, you already saw what won. But we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Before we get to that, we have to start, like we always do, with our patron shoutouts. We have one new patron, not really new, but an upgrade, which we put in the new patron category, going from the $5 Hugo Award-winning level up to the $15 Academy Award winner level. We have Teresa Schwartz.
That's my mom.
It's your mom.
Thanks, Mom.
Thank you. That's fantastic. We appreciate it. And you get to recommend it. Has she recommended something? Did she text you?
No, but I do have a recommendation that she asked me for a while ago.
Before she was a $15 patron, she thought she could just sneak it in because she's your mom.
I mean, a mom request is also a good request,
Fair.
I think.
Fair. And as always, we have our list of Academy Award-winning patrons, and they are Paul, Kat Ensminger, Ben Wilcox, Teresa Schwartz, Ian from Wine Country, Cinderella is the best Cinderella, Cinderella is a close second, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Young, Scratch, Just Scratch, Shelby Says Monsters and Mayhem is out now, That Darn Skag, V. Frank, Scorsese should have listened to his gut and stayed away from gangster movies. At least this isn't The Irishman, and Alina Starkov. So apparently our two name change patrons, one of them disappointed that Ever After one based on their name. I mean, I know they're just making a joke, but they didn't put Ever After in there. So I'm thinking they were hoping for either one of the Cinderellas to win. And then our other one, which we'll get to here in just a second in our listener follow-up, but not a fan of GoodFellas, and I have not seen The Irishman, so I cannot compare it. It's on Netflix, but it's 4 hours long.
It is also based on a book.
Is it a book?
So we might have to do it at some point.
Day. I actually, because it is. I know that I remember hearing about the guy it's based on, And
I think the book has a completely different title. I believe
it does. But it's also that movie's 4 hours long.
Yeah, that doesn't sound.
Maybe not 4 hours long, but I'm pretty sure it's 3 hours long. It's longer than GoodFellas or The Godfather. But
Hollywood.
Also,
I've heard 90.
I've heard it's okay from some people. I've also heard from other people that they didn't like it. So I don't know. I don't know what. I have no interest in watching it, to be fair. But anyways, thank you all to our amazing Academy Award-winning patrons. You're the best. Time now to find out what people thought about GoodFellas.
Yeah, well, that's just your opinion, man.
All right, so we didn't have tons of feedback this week. I think this poll might have gotten buried by all of the Cinderella bracket
seems
polls.
Likely, yeah.
But we did get some feedback. On Patreon, we had 1 vote for the book and 2 for the movie. Scorsese should have listened to his gut and stayed away from gangster movies. At least this isn't The Irishman, said. The movie falls into all the worst gangster movie cliches of glorifying macho posturing and substituting it for depth of character. Pesci is a worthy nominee, but Liotta is truly terrible. If you are going to make a story that skirts a fine line with glorifying the bad, you need a talent like DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street, or you lose the nuance. Gotta vote book because there's definitely no Ray Liotta.
Interesting. I mean,
I thought he was fine.
I don't
have any strong feelings about his performance.
I would say the same thing. I don't have strong feelings either way. I don't think he's particularly amazing in any way that's sticks out, but I also didn't think he was particularly bad. And I I don't necessarily disagree that, because I remember mentioning in the prequel that I thought that, compared to some, even like The Godfather, or maybe not, I don't know. Maybe not compared to The Godfather, but like I do think that this movie still does fall into the trap, which I think Scorsese intentionally didn't want it to, that I think it does still fall into the trap of being very easy to read wrong, and to just sort of watch it as like a glorifying portrayal of the mafia lifestyle.
I think by the end we're not like supposed to want to be Henry Hill, but I don't know if that's as clear as it is in some other properties that do the same thing.
Yeah, I would agree that
not as deftly handled. It's
not maybe quite not as well handled. But even then, like even he he mentions, I don't know the gender of this name change patron. They mention like Wolf of Wall Street and DiCaprio. And I agree that movie does the same thing. It's a similar idea. It's it's all about the system that creates a person like this, and the sort of tragic, horrifying road they go down. But I there's plenty of horrible people who look at The Wolf of Wall Street as aspirational, tons of them. So, even I guess my slight pushback is that even this example you cited of like, where an actor does a really good job portraying this character and it's handled a little bit better, of skirting that line of glorifying like bad people, even that I think you could make the same argument that I don't think it's that. Again, DiCaprio is a much better. I guess your point is taken that DiCaprio is a much better actor than Ray Liotta is, but I still don't know if that makes the difference in pushing it over. To me, I think it's, and we've talked about this a lot with with things like Fight Club and stuff, where it's at some point you can only make the movie you can only tell the story so explicitly without losing any of the craftsmanship. Before you start losing the craftsmanship and it just becomes like a PSA, about
handing the moral to your audience.
Yeah, and it is a fine line, and like there is something to be said about that. But you can only go so far before it becomes a joke, and the audience feels like they're being like they're watching a PSA about like these are bad people, don't be like them. There is something interesting if you can skirt that line but still clearly come down on one side. And I do think, ultimately that Goodfellas does ultimately kind of fall on that line of, while glorifying-ish at times, it's pretty clear as you watch the whole film and get to the end that this is not an aspirational tale. Well,
and I think it is also complicated by this being about a real person.
Yeah.
And something that more or less actually happened.
Right.
So it's not going to end with him like getting shot in the street.
Right. Or yeah. He does kind of have to follow, at least to some extent, the actual events, how they played out, which is he just goes into witness protection. It's a boring ending. Like it's a non-glorify. It's like it doesn't glorify it, but it also doesn't like put a harsh like.
Well, he kind of gets away with it.
Yeah, he kind of gets away with it, but he doesn't get to keep living. I don't know. It's complicated. I get point taken. Interesting conversation. Anyways,
over on Facebook, we had 1 vote for the book and 4 for the movie. James said, I admittedly have not read the book, but I'm voting for the movie simply because it is considered a classic, is a part of the Congressional National Film Registry, and its loss in the 1991 Best Picture category is considered one of the biggest travesties in Oscar history. All that shows that there are very few books and movies more revered than Goodfellas.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. It is a very...
I had to look up what it lost to.
Did it lose to Dances with Wolves?
It lost to Dances with Wolves.
I have not seen Dances with Wolves,
I haven't seen it either.
To be fair, so I do not know.
It sounds like something that probably didn't age well.
Yes, my guess would be Dances with Wolves has aged very poorly in compared to Goodfellas. If I had to, I mean, it definitely feels like one of those things that falls into some
Yeah.
very age-old, terrible sort of white savior tropes and whatnot. Again, having not seen a second of Dances with Wolves, I don't know. Don't come at me if you like that movie. I don't know. I'm just saying it seems like from a cursory sort of outside view. But anyways.
On Twitter, we had 0 votes for the book, 9 for the movie, and 1 listener who couldn't decide between the two. Brian Soilo said, I tried to get through this book looking for more details on the story after seeing the movie and just had a really tough time. It reads more like a news article, and with the fast-paced fever dream action of the movie, it couldn't hold my attention. Movie for me by a bunch. And I think that's fair. It's definitely a very, like, it was written by a journalist.
Yeah, I mean, that's what
And
you mentioned that
you
several
can
times
tell.
in the episode, that it is very journalistic-y.
Yeah, and
feel.
if that's not your vibe, you're probably not going to enjoy the experience of reading the book. Now, I will say that I don't think I mentioned this, but as I was reading it, I was also listening to the audiobook, and I think that probably helped me along a little bit because I was able to more feel like I was listening to like a true crime
like a
podcast or
yeah.
something,
Yeah.
Rather than just like sitting and reading a very long news article.
Yeah, that's fair.
So maybe try that.
Yeah.
You know, you never know.
You never know.
And Kelly Napier, the patron who requested this film, said, the whole movie feels like a fever dream, especially as Henry Hill and his wife spiral down as the film progresses. It's a masterclass in immersive filmmaking because I always feel like I'm traveling the path with him. It never lets up from the first beat, and I love it.
I do agree. The frenetic pace of the editing and the nature of how it's shot definitely brings you along for the ride in a way that is very compelling. So,
And I'm glad we were able to agree on this one, Kelly.
yes.
On Instagram, we had 0 votes for the book and 12 for the movie.
Yeah.
The Instagram polls are always interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like they differ from the other polls in a strange way every time.
I wonder, it's weird too, because it doesn't seem like it's not on Instagram that it goes out to more people. More people would be the one that would have the most.
The one that would have the most reach to like people who aren't already
Would be
following
Twitter.
us would be Twitter.
I would think, yeah. Because you do it as stories on Instagram, which you would
Right.
have to be following us to see.
I think so, yeah.
Unless I don't know other ways that you could see stories, but
And
I think you have to be
there's
following
not a
us.
way to like share stories on Instagram. So
No, and
I
I
don't
don't know anybody who scrolls through like the For You page on Instagram. I don't know, assuming there is like a For You page or
I
something.
mean, there is, but it's posts. It's not stories.
That's what I
It's-
mean.
Yeah, it's
but
like posts and reels.
I know it's not posts, but like even still, I just don't know how anybody would stumble across it. So it has to be
Yeah,
our
I don't know.
listeners,
Yeah.
probably.
So maybe this is the best metric.
Maybe it
I
is
don't
the
know.
most accurate. I don't know. It's interesting.
Anyway, Doug M. Campbell on Instagram said, I haven't read the book, but I'll add it to my list. Goodfellas is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I enjoyed hearing the episode. Here's a fun fact. Apparently, the comedy My Blue Heaven is based on Henry Hill's life and witness protection. You two might want to check that movie out if you like Steve Martin.
Somebody else mentioned this.
Somebody else mentioned it somewhere, and then I didn't get to respond to it, and then I couldn't find it again.
Yeah,
because social media is a nightmare.
I thought it was on Facebook or something.
might have been.
Somebody, maybe on the
somebody
episode
else
post, somebody mentioned My Blue Heaven. And I looked it up, and it's not remotely described as like it's just, like there's nothing on like the synopsis or anything that mentions anything about like Henry Hill or anything. But it is about a guy from the mafia in witness protection, so very likely could be. And assuming this person's information is correct, that would make sense. But it's Steve Martin, and they left out the other half of this is oh God, I'm blanking on his name. The guy Rick Moranis.
Oh.
Which would be interesting. Like
Yeah.
I love Rick Moranis, and so that could be. I also like Steve Martin, so it might be fun. Who knows?
All right, so our listener polls winner was the movie with 27 votes to the book's 2, plus 1 undecided. The book got a little more trounced than I thought it might.
Not me. I was expecting that.
Nobody
knows it's based on a book.
I mean, I was expecting the movie to win by a lot, but I thought we might get like a couple more book votes.
I mean, I guess, but I was expecting something in the ballpark of 1 or 2 votes for the book, and the movie getting the rest of them because almost
and
nobody
I think
even is aware
this one
there's a
is
book.
definitely like swayed by the fact that probably not a lot of people have read the book, but a lot of people have seen.
A lot of people have seen the movie. It's one of the it's an American classic. All right, time now to learn quite a bit about Cinderella.
I got excited.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Okay, so Cinderella. Cinderella is a folktale with thousands of variants throughout the world. A recognizable version of Cinderella appears in dozens and dozens of cultures globally and historically. And in modernity, it's one of the most frequently retold and reimagined fairy tales, like ever. Throw a stone, you will hit a version of Cinderella. Cinderella's Arne Thompson Uther Index type is 510A, which is a subtype of 510, the persecuted heroine. Other folktale subtypes that fall under 510 include Donkey Skin and The Princess in the Chest. If you're interested in reading things that are like Cinderella but aren't Cinderella.
Interesting. And it's a brief reminder for people who aren't. So you have mentioned the Arne Thompson Uther Index when we discussed.
I talked about it when we discussed Tangled, and then again when we talked about Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
So this is
it's a
folklore science, folklore studies classification system. So basically, it's this big long list that sorts different folk tales into common types that we see repeating throughout history in different cultures.
Yeah.
Cinderella is considered one of the oldest known folk tales because it's one of the oldest that we have record of. Folk tales were, of course, originally an oral tradition, and the oldest known version of Cinderella is the tale of Rhodopis. Rhodopis is an ancient tale about a Greek slave girl who marries the king of Egypt. The story was first recorded by the Greek historian Strabo, I think, in the late 1st century BC.
I do speak modern Greek. Just never do it on the podcast.
In the late 1st century BC or the early 1st century AD. However, the Greek historian Herodotus.
I don't know if that's correct. That's how I've always heard it said, to be fair. It was Herodotus.
Herodotus, about 5 centuries before Strabo, recorded a popular legend about a possibly related courtesan named Rhodopis in his histories. So possible that this was inspired by an actual person? Maybe. We'll never know. But maybe. So the story of Rhodopis goes that while Rhodopis was bathing, an eagle snatched one of her sandals and carried it to Memphis in Egypt.
Yes.
Not in
I always
America.
forget there's a Memphis in Egypt.
Memphis,
and it makes a lot more
Egypt.
sense that Memphis has that dumb giant pyramid.
Yeah.
If you've ever been to Memphis, Tennessee, there's a giant pyramid. It's the largest pyramid in the world outside of Egypt or something. It's some weird thing like that. It's like literally the largest.
It's very American.
Yeah, it's like the largest pyramid in the world, not in Egypt or something. I could be wrong. It's some weird fact like that. But it's got a Bass Pro Shops in it, or it used to. I don't know if it's still in there, but.
So an eagle snatched one of her sandals, carried it to Memphis, Egypt. And while the king was administering justice out in the open air, the eagle flew over his head and flung the sandal into his lap. And the king was moved by both the beauty of the shape of the sandal and by the strangeness of the occurrence, and sent men in all directions into the country in quest of the woman who wore the sandal. And when she was found, she was then brought to Memphis and became the wife of the king. That's the story.
So that dude was just into feet.
Maybe.
And smelled a
perhaps.
sandal, smelled a sandal and was like, yep, this is doing it. Gotta find this person.
But we're seeing some familiar elements
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
Even
Yes. Using the
already.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
A few other ancient variations come from Persia, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, and there's actually a few different variations that appear in 1001 Nights, which for anyone who doesn't know off the top of their head, that's a collection of Middle Eastern folktales. Now, there is some debate that the most well-known Chinese version, Yizhan, might be older than Rhodopis, but Rhodopis was written down first, or at least we have a surviving record of it being written down first, so we can only go with what we know. Moving forward from the oral tradition to the Western literary tradition, the first literary European version of the story was published in Italy by Giambattista Basile in 1634. This version would end up being the main inspiration for what is now the most well-known version of Cinderella, Charles Perrault's Cendrillon ou la petite pantoufle de verre.
It was pretty good, I think.
I think it was pretty good.
Pretty close, yeah.
AKA Cinderella or the Little Glass Slipper. It has a subtitle.
It does, yeah. It's like Birdman. It's got like a colon and then after the Birdman or the unexpected hijinks of nonsense words. I don't know the whole title. It doesn't matter. Anyways.
So although a lot of older folktales feature recognizable elements, as we saw with Rhodopis, Perrault's version was the first to feature the now iconic glass slipper. Some interpreters have suggested that Perrault's glass slipper Pantoufle de verre, VERR, had actually been a squirrel fur slipper, Pantoufle de verre, VAIR, and in some earlier version edition of the story that either Perrault or one of his sources confused the words. However, most scholars believe that the glass slipper was a deliberate piece of poetic invention by Perrault.
It feels
real French.
Yes.
It's real French.
It just feels like it would probably be the glass was the intention and not the squirrel fur slipper.
Kind of an interesting little fun fact.
If it originated in the like Appalachian
or like Russia, maybe.
Yeah, then sure, maybe the squirrel fur slipper, but I don't know.
Another well-known European version was recorded in Germany by who else but the Brothers Grimm in the 19th century. Aschenputtel, or the Little Ash Girl, is recognizable as Cinderella, but much more violent than Perrault's more genteel version. I've talked on here before about how it's incorrect to say the original about a folktale because there's no such thing as an original version of a folktale. We can have oldest known, or we can have most well-known, but we can't have original. And the conflation between these two, like, kind of main European versions is a good example of that the error in that line of thinking kind of in real time.
Yeah.
Because if I had $1 for every time I've seen someone talking about Disney's Cinderella and saying, well, did you know in the original the stepsisters cut off their toes to try and fit into the slipper? No, friends. Disney's animated film is based on Perrault and is incredibly close to Perrault. So that particular bloodshed comes from Aschenputtel.
There you go.
I'm probably butchering that, but I'm really enjoying saying it.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. I don't know. I don't speak German.
The other most important thing to know that you need to know about the history of Cinderella is that now when you say Cinderella, most people are going to think of the 1950 animated Disney film. Yep. And I have to stress that was orchestrated purposefully. The reason that Disney's classic fairy tale adaptations are so close to whichever variant they were pulling from is because Walt Disney wanted his versions to be the versions. Like, his goal was to supplant older versions with his version in the collective consciousness.
He succeeded.
This is very Disney, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And look, I'm a child of the 90s. I love Disney. I love his version of Cinderella too. And I'm not saying it's not a great movie because it's a beautiful piece of animation. But as an amateur folklorist, I have to say my bit, which is that folktales contribute to society in a way that corporations and IP copyrights simply cannot. Folktales belong to the people. They're something that connects us through the ways that we are different and through the ways that we are the same. So as always, if your baseline for Cinderella is the Disney film, nothing wrong with that, but I do encourage you to seek out other variations.
It's a perfectly good jumping off point.
Yes, it is. So I will get off my soapbox now. Let's talk about the elements that make a story a variation of Cinderella.
Yeah. Because that is interesting. I was kind of wondering, when we have all these different versions during the bracket that we had, it's like, where do you draw the line for what is Cinderella?
What makes Cinderella
Yes.
Cinderella?
Yeah.
Let's find out. So there are 7 basic elements, which I love. 'cause
According to who?
That's a good round fairy tale number, according to folklorists.
Okay.
So there are seven basic elements that you need in order to make a Cinderella story. And the first is the name of the folktale type. You need a persecuted heroine.
Seems pretty straightforward.
The protagonist needs to be down on their luck and or abused by authority figures in some way. Obviously, a heroine is traditional, but there are modern variations that feature different genders.
Yeah.
The next defining trait is the villain, the abuser, the persecutor. Again, this is typically a female authority figure. It's often a relative. Stepmother and or stepsisters are traditional, but you might see versions where it's the birth mother, an older sister or sisters, grandmother, etc., etc. And again, modern versions sometimes play a little fast and loose here too. Trait number 3 is magical aid of some sort. Thanks to Perrault, we often see that aid appear in the form of a magical fairy godmother, but other options include various animals or natural elements like the wind or a tree, or Cinderella's dead mother reincarnated as an animal or an object. Some versions give Cinderella both a fairy godmother and animal helpers. Variations that eliminate the magical element from the story often retrofit this aspect through a human mother figure or sometimes Cinderella's own wit and cunning.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be magical. I was going to ask because I did a little bit of reading about Ever After when I was doing my research, and supposedly there's no magic in Ever After. I have not seen it, but and so it doesn't have to be magical, but...
Now, I will say, the specific, magical aid, that's more of part of the definition of a folk tale,
Okay.
what a folk tale Cinderella variant is. I think as we get into modernity, as I've kind of been stipulating, reimaginings are going
Right.
to play fast and loose with
Right.
this, but she receives aid of some sort
Okay.
that helps push her forward, like the catalyst in the story.
Okay.
Right? Whatever it is that sends her to the ball. Speaking of, the next element that we need, elements technically, we need the ball gown, and the curfew. So Cinderella needs to attend at least one fancy event or party that she's been forbidden from attending by the villain, usually under the guise of her being too low and dirty and having nothing appropriate to wear. Mm-hmm. Cue the magical aid with the magical ball gown.
Yes.
The curfew is not always tied to magic, even in folklore. Sometimes Cinderella just leaves the ball early to try to beat her family
Which
home.
makes sense, yeah. If they're there, then, yeah.
But the important thing is she cuts out early.
Yes.
The next element that we have to have is the identifying item. Now, again, thanks to Perrault, we most commonly see a glass slipper here. In some versions, it's still a shoe, but made of other materials. For example, in Grimm's, she has slippers made of gold. It's also pretty common for the identifying item to be jewelry, an anklet, a ring, a bracelet. In some versions where Cinderella attends multiple balls, the prince might gain an item each night. So one night a ring, the next a bracelet, the next a slipper, etc. Modern versions often reinterpret this item. In 2004's A Cinderella Story, she loses her cell phone.
Yeah.
Very 2004.
Right.
But the important thing is that she leaves some item behind for the prince to then identify her with, which leads me to the next narrative element, which is the revelation of Cinderella's identity at the climax of the story. Now, getting to that point is usually prolonged in some way, often by the abusers insisting that Cinderella couldn't possibly be the one that the prince is searching for. But Cinderella will always be able to prove her identity through the aforementioned item, whether that's by proving that the item fits or by producing the matching item. A lot of times she actually has like twin bracelets if there's jewelry. So she loses one bracelet, but lo and behold, she has the matching one. And jewelry was custom made back in the day, so you couldn't just
go to Claire's.
Go to Claire's and get yourself the matching Cinderella bracelet. And the last element that we need is the story's denouement, which sees Cinderella triumph over her abusers. Now, traditionally, she triumphs over them by marrying the prince and raising her social station. But again, that often gets reinterpreted, especially in modern versions that might be a little less keen to have getting married be the ultimate triumph.
Right.
The other thing that we often see as part of the denouement is the stepfamily reaping what they've sown. They might descend into obscurity or even poverty. They might be put to death.
Wow.
Or they just might be left with the knowledge that they could have benefited from their relationship with Cinderella had they not mistreated her. So not only a flight of fanciful wish fulfillment, but a cautionary tale.
Indeed.
Cinderella, perhaps more than any other folktale, has permeated the collective consciousness. Aside from stories and books and movies, the tale has been reimagined for the stage, for television, in comics and video games, and basically anything you can think of. Cinderella as a character also exists outside of her own story and can be placed into other stories or used in other types of media. The story itself also lends plot elements, allusions, and tropes to a wide variety of media that may or may not actually be about Cinderella. We even have a conceptual Cinderella. The word Cinderella has, by analogy, come to mean someone whose attributes were unrecognized, who unexpectedly achieves recognition or success after a period of obscurity and neglect, i.e., a Cinderella story. A phrase most often used in sports, which made our Cinderella bracket event very apropos.
Indeed. There's a sports movie called Cinderella Man, I think.
I think it's Cinderella Man.
Yeah, with Russell Crowe.
So with that, let's talk about our bracket winner, Ever After.
There you go. It's time to talk about Ever After.
Then it's true, the story.
Oh, yes. Now then, what is that phrase you use? Once upon a time.
Feels just like Christmas. I get a mother and sisters all in one day.
Say hello to your new stepsister.
Mademoiselle.
Ever After is a 1998 film directed by Andy Tennant, also directed Fool's Gold, Hitch, and Sweet Home Alabama, among a handful of other things. It was written by Andy Tennant, Susanna Grant, who also wrote Pocahontas, Aaron Brockovich, and The Fifth Wave, and Rick Parks, who wrote The Secret Dare to Dream, and Big Wolf on Campus. One episode of Big Wolf on Campus. And that's like all he's ever done.
Can I ask, you have Big Wolf on Campus styled with 3 exclamation marks.
I fucking loved that show when I was a kid.
What the title is?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was just excited to see that this person had written on Big Wolf on Campus, which is a show I loved when I was pre-teen. I don't know when it came on. I think I was probably like 13 or something when I saw it. It's basically Buffy, but it's like a Monster of the Week. It's like a kid's version of Buffy, where the main character is a werewolf, and he fights like monsters of the week with a band of friends. Basically, it was on like ABC Family or Fox Family or whatever the family channel was called back then.
I
think there's like 2 or 3
watch
seasons.
it.
I have not seen it since I was a little kid, but I remember loving that show a lot. And then, The Secret, Dare to Dream is wild because that's the sequel to The Secret movie, which is the movie about the nonsense like book about how if you just really want things, they'll come to you.
You gotta manifest it.
Yeah, you just gotta manifest it. Yeah. The film stars Drew Barrymore, Doug Ray Scott, Angelica Houston, Jean Moreau, Megan Dodds, Melanie Linsky, and Toby Jones, among other people. The film has a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 66% on Metacritic, and a 7.1 out of 10 on IMDb, and it made $98 million against a budget of $26 million. It also was nominated by the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films for 4 awards, including Best Supporting Actress for Angelica Houston and nominated for Best Music. It won for Best Actress for Drew Barrymore and Best Costumes. And this is back before we wouldn't the regular Academy Awards would not recognize films like this. I feel like until the mid 2000s at the earliest, like there's a reason the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films existed.
Yeah.
It's because genre films just didn't make it into the Academy Awards much at all, like ever. I mean, they did occasionally, but it was rare.
Did Lord of the Rings change that?
It might have been Lord of the Rings. Yeah, that was a big one. I'm sure there were other ones before that, but it was rare. Like I said, it was. I'm sure people can point out examples. Maybe like 2001 or something.
Right.
I don't know, but like I bet there are other examples. But in general, it was incredibly rare. Whereas now it's a lot less rare than it used to be. And I think Lord of the Rings maybe was one of the big sort of turning points for that. Which would have been, like 4 years after this, a couple years after this.
I regret to say that Big Wolf on Campus does not appear to be streaming anywhere.
I believe the entire thing's on YouTube.
Okay.
I think. I could be wrong about that.
I'm very excited.
The castle shown in the film, so many of my formative crushes were from that show. So
very excited.
Yep. The castle shown in the film is the Chateau de Hautefort. I don't know. It's French.
I don't know.
It's spelled like haute, like the fashion, like Haute. Isn't that haute?
Yeah.
Yeah, Hautefort, and it's fort. In the Dordogne region of France, a very famous castle. You can look it up. It's apparently where they filmed. Or it's not a castle, but it's a big, like, estate, basically. The painting of Danielle, our main character in this film, I found out, was based on Leonardo da Vinci's Head of a Woman. And apparently Leonardo da Vinci is in this movie. All right. There actually wasn't much in terms of, like, production notes that I could find about this movie for whatever reason. So it's IMDb trivia time. So take this all with a grain of salt. Number one fact with a bullet on IMDb trivia. Drew Barrymore has stated that this is the favorite of all of her films.
I would believe that.
I would believe it too.
I would believe that.
Yeah, I would believe it, but I just, who knows? Very interesting. Apparently, the Mona Lisa shows up in this movie. And in real life, the Mona Lisa is painted on a piece of wood, but in the film, it's painted on a piece of canvas. And I love this. This IMDb trivia fact says this was done intentionally, but does not go on to explain why or what, what the purpose of doing it intentionally was. Like, I assume when it says this was done intentionally, they mean the movie, like, doing it incorrect.
Yeah, I would assume so.
And so my guess is maybe something happens with, I don't know. I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know. But it just says this was done intentionally and does not elaborate on why it was done intentionally or what that means. The glass slippers in the film were made by Salvatore Ferragamo. Is that like a famous shoe person?
I guess.
Just included it in case somebody knows who Salvatore Ferragamo is, because they made the slippers, the glass slippers in this movie. A couple other actors were considered for the role of Prince Henry before Doug Ray Scott was cast and actually turned down the role. And that includes Johnny Lee Miller, who most people might know. He's been in a bunch of stuff, but probably most recently, like famously, he was Sherlock Holmes in the Elementary show, the one with Lucy Liu, I think. Wasn't Lucy Liu?
Yeah, I think so. I never watched that.
And like my parents watched that show. They enjoyed it. I don't know. It was on like CBS or something. And Jude Law apparently turned down the role as well. So the film is included on the AFI's 2002 list of 400 movies that were nominated for the top 100 greatest American love story movies. I think this one was like number 40 or something. It was on the list of top 100 of America's greatest love story films.
Interesting.
So there you go. Now we've got a couple reviews to get to, including in a minute one from the all-time great.
Your best friend.
Yes, the bestie. First up, we have Elisa Schwartzbaum from Entertainment Weekly, who gave the film a B- and said, quote, "Against many odds, Ever After comes up with a good one. This novel variation is still set in the once upon a time 16th century, but it features an active 1990s style heroine. She argues about economic theory and civil rights with her royal suitor, rather than a passive, exploited hearth sweeper who warbles, 'A dream is a wish your heart makes.'" End quote. Roasting.
We got that 90s feminist take on Cinderella.
Yep. And then, as always, at least for films before 2000, whatever year he died, from the Chicago Sun-Times, film critic Roger Ebert praised the film, giving it 3 out of 4 stars and saying, quote, "The movie is one of surprises, not least that the old tale still has life and passion in it. I went to the screening expecting some sort of soppy children's picture and found myself in a costume romance with some of the same energy and zest as The Mask of Zorro. And I was reminded again that Drew Barrymore can hold the screen and involve us in her characters. Here's the little Cinder girl. She is able to at last put aside her bedraggled losers and flower as a fresh young beauty, and she brings poignancy and fire to the role."
All right.
I don't know who the bedraggled losers are.
I don't either.
I assume he means maybe like the stepsisters in the, I don't know.
He could mean, or it could be a reference to because she had a rough time for a while.
That's what I was wondering. I couldn't tell if that was a reference to Drew Barrymore or the character in the movie. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure. I don't know either.
Roger Ebert, fan of Drew Barrymore.
Apparently. Yep. And a fan of The Mask of Zorro, which is a very good, very fun movie. To be fair, it's a very, if you like your Pirates of the Caribbeans, your Princess Brides, you will enjoy The Mask of Zorro. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I remember.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
I remember liking it quite a bit. It's pretty fun. I don't know how it holds up, but we'll see. Anyways. Before we wrap up, we want to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit, supporting us there, and by following us on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, all those places. You get to respond, and we get to talk about it in our prequel episodes. Katie, where can people watch Ever After?
Well, as always, you can check with your local library, or if you still have a local video rental store, you can check with them. I feel like odds are probably pretty good that you can find this one.
Yeah, it would seem like it.
Solid chance.
Yeah.
Or you can stream this with a subscription to Stars through Amazon, Stars through Roku, DirecTV, or Spectrum TV. Or you can rent it for around $4 through Apple TV, Amazon, YouTube, Vudu Fandango, AMC Theaters on Demand, Redbox, or DirecTV.
Lots of places. Lots of places to watch it. I'm excited to check it out. I've never seen this, like I said. I just, for whatever reason, is one of those ones that I missed. I've also not seen the runner-up, which you didn't mention, but we'll be doing that.
We will be talking about the runner-up was the 1997 Brandy version of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella.
Yes.
So we will be watching the runner-up and doing a bonus episode on our Patreon.
Yes.
For that.
We're talking about that one. So I'm excited to see both because I've never seen either of them. I have seen, we'll talk about this. We went and saw a live version of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical of Cinderella, but obviously still different than the movie version. Everybody makes their changes to it, but I am excited to watch Ever After because I've never seen it. I like Drew Barrymore. Every time I see her in something, I think she's good. I haven't seen a lot of movies with Drew Barrymore, but I usually enjoy her when I do, and I am interested to see what this movie does with the tale because I do find it fascinating seeing the ways that that storytellers modernize sort of very traditional
very
tales.
Old, very traditional stories. Yeah,
I always think that's fun. So I'm looking forward to that. And we'll be talking about it in 1 week's time. And until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books.
keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.